Hi, I'm Dr. Chandler. Welcome to my course video lecture notes. Please print the notes provided with the video and create your own notes to get the most out of this lecture. This lecture reviews psychoanalytic theory, also known as psychodynamic theory. According to Sigmund Freud, personality is driven by inner forces dependent upon early developmental experiences and instincts. What are these inner forces? Freud posited that these inner forces are the id, the inside devil, I want it now, and the ego, the sense of self. I need to do a bit of planning to get that. And the superego, which is the angel. You can't have it. It's not right. These three forces are fighting below the surface of your awareness according to the psychodynamic theory. What seeps out into your unconscious makes you uncomfortable. The theory is pretty tricky, saying that we cannot deny our id because we are not aware of the id. The id is in our unconscious and comes out in our dreams when the ego is resting. But even in our sleep, the ego takes care to disguise the true dark meaning of our dreams. Freud theorized that much of the mind is hidden from conscious awareness. According to Freud, the id is buried in the unconscious. This is called the typographical or iceberg model of personality. You see conscious awareness above the waterline, unconscious awareness below the waterline, and the id is much of the personality represented in this model, with the superego stretching down deeper than the ego. Here is another topographical or iceberg model of personality. You can see that the superego or angel and the ego or referee are in a preconscious mind that can be made conscious under the right circumstances. For example, if I asked you about your last birthday, you could probably tell me something about that, though perhaps you weren't thinking about it right when I asked you. Only some of the ego and the superego are regularly available to full consciousness, unlike the id or the inside devil, which is only accessible by projective techniques that will be summarized with the interpretation of dreams in a bit. The notion that much of the mind's activity is below the level of consciousness is supported by research, though some of this theory is important more for historical than for clinical reasons. For example, Freud's developmental model, called the psychosexual stages of development, were the basis of other highly thought of stage models of human development. Let's look at Freud's psychosexual stage developmental model. This model outlines the stages that the id's pleasure-seeking energies focus on erogenous zones. Stage 1 is oral, birth to about 18 months, where you see gratification through thumb-sucking orally. Stage 2, anal. This child learns to respond to some demands such as bowel and bladder control. Stage 3, phallic. From about 3 to 6, the pleasure zone is the genitals and sexual feelings toward parent. Stage 4, latency. From about 6 to puberty, no overt sexual development occurs, according to Freud. The 5th stage is the genital stage, beginning in puberty, during which sexuality matures and the person seeks pleasure through sexual contact with others. This theory focuses on biological sexual development from birth to adolescence. Freud theorized that some traumatic experience at any stage could cause fixation. a lingering focus of pleasure-seeking energies at an earlier psychosexual stage where conflicts were unresolved. Then the stage became central to the individual's personality, such as an individual being anal expressive, having a potty mouth, being messy, overly generous, they couldn't keep a secret, or they could be anal retentive, emotionally constipated, stingy, ultra neat, and controlling. That is, if they were fixated at stage 2. Say they had a mean babysitter who tied a dirty diaper around their neck for 2 days. There is a preponderance of developmental research that concludes that human personality is more than biological development, and that humans grow and develop until they die, that we are not fully developed mentally, emotionally, or socially at adolescence, as Freud's psychosexual stages posits. A theory that is more representative of human development is Erikson's psychosocial theory that grew out of Freud's theory and expands development to account for our psychological and social experiences across the lifespan. Erikson was a psychoanalytic student of Freud's daughter, Anna. Psychoanalytic terms include anxiety, an aversive emotional state, that means painful, experienced as feelings of nervousness, worry, agitation, and panic. Freud believed that anxiety is caused by unconscious impulses escaping as steam from a boiling pot. The ego's job is to act as the lid and keep the unconscious impulses from our awareness. The ego uses tools called defense mechanisms to shield us from our sexual and aggressive impulses and help us maintain our self-esteem. According to this theory of personality, the id is always stirring the pot in a battle with the superego for control of the personality. The role of the ego, again, is to act as the referee between these two opponents. Here are some examples of defense mechanisms that the ego uses to protect the sense of self. Again, defense mechanisms are the ego's protective methods of reducing anxiety by unconsciously distorting reality. Defense mechanisms are automatic and usually unconscious processes that we use, such as denial to protect ourselves from unpleasant reality by refusing to perceive the meaning. Defense mechanisms are used to reduce or cope with anxiety or fear, resolve emotional or psychological conflict. Defense mechanisms can become pathological when overused. For the example of denial, a person claims not to drink too much, saying, "My friends drink a lot more than I do," but the individual does make sure to surround themselves with others who drink much more. Projection, another defense mechanism, is placing blame for one's difficulty on others or attributing one's own forbidden desires to others, telling your partner, "You don't love me anymore, you're infatuated with my best friend." But be very careful about what you accuse others of. Freud would say the accusations are true of your own secret desires. Reaction formation is preventing dangerous desires from being accessed by endorsing opposite opinions and attitudes from the behavior, to use them as barriers to your own desires. So let's say you experience an attraction for a same-sex friend, so you beat up patrons coming out of a gay bar. You're doing the opposite to mask your own feelings and desires. Sublimation is displacing unacceptable desires such as aggression in a socially acceptable manner, such as career choices. Someone who desires fighting might become an attorney or a boxer. Repression is pushing painful or dangerous thoughts out of consciousness. The research on repression indicates that painful thoughts are actually much more likely to return over and over unbidden, such as flashbacks, than to be forgotten, as Freud believed. Displacement is discharging pent-up feelings on objects less dangerous than those that initially aroused the emotion. For example, your boss yells at you, so after work you could go to the gym to take out your frustration, or you could go home and yell at your partner. Rationalization. A person finds a sensible reason or excuse for performing or thinking about an unacceptable behavior, such as, I'm broke and I have bills to pay, but hey, there's a sale on that I have to go to save money. The defense mechanism of identification means increasing feelings of worth by identifying oneself with another person or institution, often of illustrious standing, such as wearing clothing with big brand names or sports teams, or telling everyone you meet that your dad is the mayor. All of these associations can help a person feel some sense of power. Regression is retreating to an earlier developmental level, such as chewing your pencil when you are nervous or throwing a temper tantrum when you are upset. Personality assessment techniques where the test taker is presented with ambiguous stimuli and is asked to respond some way are known as projective techniques. The projective technique stimuli must be ambiguous so that the individual can read almost anything into the picture and reveal unconscious content. Projective techniques are also called subjective because what could be seen will vary depending upon the individual's experience. The techniques or tests are not objective because there is not one definite predetermined meaning for the stimuli. These forms of assessment are generally seen as having less reliability and less validity than objective techniques. Thematic apperception tests are a projective test with test takers asked to tell stories about a series of ambiguous pictures. TAT pictures are less ambiguous than ink blots, but thought to be better at getting at interpersonal relationships. Freud's first techniques began with the use of a form of hypnosis. He later found that this technique did not work for some and began to use the talking cure. The patient with the talking cure is asked to talk for an hour while the therapist takes notes, including the expressions and emotions and verbal content of the patient. The theory is that while the patient free associates saying whatever comes to mind, the so-called stream of consciousness, without editing, so that the ego relaxes and reduces its vigilance, then unconscious content is thought to slip out slowly over time, revealing unconscious themes. The therapist communicates the unconscious content, and the patient gains insight into their unconscious motives. The goal of psychoanalytical theory is insight into sexual aggressive desires that are seen as the source of neurotic symptoms. By becoming aware, one releases the psychological energy trapped by the hidden memory from psychosexual development. In this way, free association is a technique used to find the points of emotional disturbance as the key to the locked-up energy that is causing the neurosis. With transference, the patient responds to the therapist as if the therapist were a parent or some other important person in their life, so the therapist can bring the emotional conflict into the open that the patient has suppressed, which is thought to cause the neurotic symptoms. Freudian slips are slips of the tongue or statements that were not intended to be made and reveal unconscious content. The goal of talking therapy is to treat neurotic disorders by exposing and interpreting unconscious tensions from the patient's free associations, dreams, and transference to release previously repressed feelings, allowing the patient to gain insight. Dream analysis is interpreting the nature and content of dreams to give clues into the unconscious. Dreams are seen as the royal road to the unconscious. The interpretations of dreams are usually about aggression or sex. For example, caves represent vaginas, arrows and long structures represent penises, and going up or downstairs represents intercourse. Psychodynamic psychologists believe that psychopathology results from inadequate conflict resolution and fixation in early development. The goal of therapy is to strengthen the ego and gain insight into repressed unconscious impulses. The therapist is seen as an investigator, interpreting dreams and using talk therapy to uncover what is repressed in the unconscious.